we're broadcasting in Discord. It's all good. Man, I am super jealous of Sir Wade because his streams are always so professionally run. The guy's on top of the game when he's doing his animation streams. Oh, there you go. Here's another animation stream to add to the collection. Okay, so let me start off by asking you guys, where are you guys at with your animation projects? And as well, where are you guys at with Maya? Okay, so you've done 1 second of animation so far with both of your characters. That's cool. You may have run into a few of the things that we'll talk about today. Created a hard object. I did a small head turn with a flour sack. Nice, very cool. Storyboarding, figuring out key poses and frames. Cool. Brainstorming ideas. Going back over old lectures. Right on. With texture. Okay. Going back through the tutorials. Okay, that's cool. About to delete it. Can't get my head around it at all. Okay, so I'll try to kind of walk you guys through this. I've been watching a lot on videos on it though, and I'm getting better slowly. Yeah, it is a slow journey. It's sort of, I'm really trying to remember when I first started learning XSI. Oh, actually before that, Softimage. It is really, really kind of difficult to wrap your head around. Tried my best at making a custom animated video game checkpoint. Messed up the FPS though. That's okay. Yeah, there's a lot that's kind of involved in what I call the pre-flight check, which I'll talk a little bit about, right? And I think what makes it difficult is you spend a fair amount of time setting up Maya the way you want, and there are always little dials and switches you've forgotten to set, right? Yes, if you're playing, it seems a little bit too fast. We'll talk a little bit about that, right? Ooh, my laptop should be delivered soon. Nice, nice, nice. Hopefully it's something that really smokes when it comes to Maya. Yeah, it's the first time you're doing anything like this. Very, very difficult. So let's just go through and do a little bit of a review, right? I think the difficult thing is getting in the beginning as well as getting accustomed to the navigation. And I've sort of thrown you guys in the deep end a little bit. But, you know, to alleviate boredom, right? I could have spent the first 2 months just talking about where everything is in the UI, right? So yeah, it is difficult, and I was expecting that, but I was hoping you guys would just sort of go with it. Keyframes in an arm movement is normal. We will talk about that. You're getting into the specifics now, okay? So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to do a setup, and I'll talk to you guys about animation techniques. It's both heartening and disheartening to know that you guys are already animating. It's good because I want you to get in there and try a few things. Animation is anything. Animation is primarily about investigation and experimentation, right? Okay, so first let's take a look at our project structure because that will be a little bit of a refresher on how you want to set things up. What we are trying to do is create dependencies, meaning we have one thing linked up to another thing, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that. So let's pop into our project folder, which I did move it recently, didn't I? I think that I did. I moved it onto my local, I think, to get it to go a little bit quicker. No, I put it on my cloud drive just so I could universally access it from a variety of different machines. So inside here, under my little animation projects, there it is, the Return of Ball Guy, right? So inside this one single Maya project, I created a series of folders inside the scenes. Now remember, Maya creates these folders for me. You might look at this and go, wow, that's super intimidating. There's a lot going on there. And then when you look at it at first, it's just wall of words, right? So you just need to take a look and understand that actually most of these are empty. These are just folders created automatically by Maya because Maya will need some of these. But really, we're working inside the scenes folder and we're developing scenes, right? Now I've got a few of these separated out logically. I've got the actors folder. This has nothing but our characters. So this is where we started, right? We made a ball guy, we rigged the ball guy, right? And we've got the flour sack and then the juice box, right? Then we have our props, right? We're not doing the basketball hoop thing, so it's all good. So we got that. We've also got our set, which is a city street, which currently is just a plane on the ground, right? And we have our layout. So the layout folder is where we're going to be doing our work, right? And now inside that layout folder is scene 1. So let's take a look at scene 1, right? So again, I've just created a structure inside of my project so that I can build actors, props, and a set as 3 separate Maya files, right? Okay, so I've set that project. I'm going to go to File, Open. And because I set the project, Maya should take me directly to my scenes folder. Wow, that seems to be taking a little bit of time. Let's see. Do I have an issue with Excel? Let's save that guy off. While I'm waiting for that to load, I'm going to take a quick peek at Joe's flour sack look. Nice. Very cool. All right. We have technology. All right. So I'm going to go into my layout folder. It's taking a while. I'm no longer surprised at stuff like this because I have a lot going on when my PC is on. So it's all good. Let's see if we can... Excel's usually a bit of a hog, resource hog. Let's see if we can shut down one of our spreadsheets here. It's looking like update my graphics driver time. That's what it's looking like. Wow, that's... wow. There we go. Of course, mind you guys, I'm streaming off my Google Drive. So there's that as well. All right, so I'm going into my scenes folder, right? So I can review the one concept that I was talking to you guys about earlier in terms of setting up your project. All right. So we'll get an error message, but I'm not concerned about that because that's all has to do with mental ray nodes. So here's our nice little scene, right? Now, the reason why the character files and the prop files and the set files are located in different Maya projects is so that when I come in here to put my little animation together, I'm not going to destroy this character by accident. I'm not going to destroy the set by accident because the originals live somewhere else. What I've done, instead of importing these, I did what was called File, Create Reference, and reference these guys in, right? So what does referencing mean? Well, I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to my reference editor. So the reference editor says, look, none of these objects exist inside this scene. I'm taking it from somewhere else. So the city street, I'm getting from the sets folder. The flour sack and the juice box, I'm getting from the actors folder. Same with the ball guy and the basketball, I'm getting from the props folder, right? And it's just pulling it sort of in here, but it's connected to those other Maya files, right? This way, I can animate safe in the knowledge that I'm not destroying my characters, right? Believe me, it occasionally happens where you're animating. If you import your character file and you animate, you might go, oh, you know what? This character's not quite right, so I'm going to add a blend shape to the character. And you continue animating, but then you try to import your original character in something else, and you're just like, oh yeah, I made changes to that, didn't I? Those changes are in my scene file. And then, you've got various different versions of your character floating around all over the place, and you can't quite remember which one was the most recent one. So it's that kind of a thing. This way you always know that it's using your layout scene file is using the exact same character file that everybody else is using, right? Or all the other Maya scenes are using, right? So I've just organized this with group nodes, right? And sort of put my actors, sets, and props together, right? So the first order of business is to kind of get that going on, right? So the other thing, they have to fight together, or it can be a juice box fight only. It's up to you guys. Really, it's up to you guys. Where did everybody get this fight scene thing from? The original brief was for people to do a fight sequence. There were a few different problems with that. Number one, not everyone was passionate about doing a fight sequence. And I was like, really? What? Really? Really? So that was one. The other is that there were some dynamics in a fight sequence that people wanted to try, like flips and aerials and things like that, which are actually complex animation techniques. So to avoid that, I just said, look, any kind of scenario is fine, right? Oh, I was just saying it doesn't have to be a fight sequence anymore because there's some complexities involved with the fight sequence, right? So it just needs to be some kind of a scene or scenario, right? The juice box and the pillow sack can show up and they can play a friendly game of football, right? It doesn't have to be antagonistic. Really, it's up to you, right? I'm just giving you the character. I'm doing this as they used to do in studios when they give out an animation test. They just give you the character and say, animate this, right? So it's up to you. Okay, so we're going to pop in here and I'm going to set a few things. So first of all, I'm going to go into my settings. Now, the settings are located under Windows, right? Now, this might be confusing. I used to get confused between display and Windows. Display is everything that you see in here through the viewport. Windows are separate windows that you open up with tools like Attribute Editor, Channel Box, things like that, right? So inside the windows, right, we have all of our different editors that we can access. There's a whole bunch of them. I'm hopefully going to reveal them to you slowly over time. And then there's settings and preferences, right? So settings and preferences down here, let's take a look at our preferences. Now this is sort of important in the beginning stages of putting a project together, right? So we're going to take a look at the settings. Now you can click on the word settings and it'll give you universal settings. There are a few things that I want to check here first. First, I want to check my working units. They're set to centimeters. That's cool. Right? So that I know that every Maya unit is a centimeter. And I've set this with y-axis up, right? So you game guys will probably need to set Maya differently. Not for this assignment, but in the future. When you're creating your own characters, this is where you set Z up. Because inside of Unreal, the up axis is Z up. Do you guys know why the up axis is Z up for most game development software? Any thoughts? Oh, the controller derives its axis orientation from the software, right? That's okay, Julia. How's it going? You haven't missed much. Okay, so there are mathematical reasons for differentiation in axes and things like that. And it goes as far as left-hand and right-hand coordinate system mass. But you can ignore all that. I won't even get into that. That's all super confusing. When you're looking down at a piece of graph paper, right? And you're working on a graph in like maths class, you generally work with a y-axis and an x-axis, right? Well, you're looking down the z-axis, right? Now, level designers, when they're doing their map designs, will think in terms of X and Y, and they'll be looking at it from the Z-axis. Hence why the Z-axis is up, to provide the XY reference for level designers and map designers to be able to translate their work inside of Unreal, right? 3D Studio Max is also classically Z up, and yeah, I think that's it. Those are the anomalies. I call them anomalies. Yeah, Maya is typically Y up, right? So I'm checking that. Now, the other thing that I want to check real quick, which is sort of important for animation, is how we deal with speed on the timeline. So this is really important, right? So to take a look at that, I can either open up again in my Windows, settings and preferences, right? And in here, I can take a look at my animation preferences. So you can set it there. But more conveniently, here on the timeline, underneath the timeline, we have our animation settings. I'm in the wrong UI. Let me flip over to, to my, let's go to Maya Classic for a second, because you guys will all have Maya Classic. Okay, so in the animation, underneath the animation timeline, you'll get an animation toolbar, and all the way over here, you'll have animation preferences, right? See that little animated dude? Open up your animation preferences. Now, check it out. It opens up the exact same preference window that I navigated to via Windows, right? So here we've got the preferences specifically for our time slider. So frame rate, we need to figure out what frame rate our animation will be playing back, right? So you generally have a few choices. Is it playing back at 23.976 frames per second? You might have heard of 60 frames per second in games, 25 frames per second for PAL. What does all that kind of mean, right? So, just for your kind of edification, in the UK, it's a PAL signal. So things are played back on UK televisions at 25 frames per second. In North America, it's NTSC, which is 29.97 frames per second, right? So almost 30 frames per second. And film stock is 24 frames per second. And animators typically animate in 24 frames per second, right? So we want to keep that set at 24 frames a second. Do you know why there's a difference between the frame rates? Say, for example, 29.97 in North America and 25 frames per second here in the UK. Why is there a difference to begin with? It's not cultural. It has to do with the frequency of power, right? So power, the frequency of power being generated is set differently in the UK than it is in North America, which therefore drives a stepper motor differently, which goes through a film gate differently. That's the discrepancy, right? It comes right from the mains, right? So then that begs the question, why is film 24 frames per second? Well, that was a universally agreed upon frame rate, I believe, that still maintained a good quality persistence of vision at the least amount of film that's necessary to be used. So it's a budgetary thing, right? It's like, what can we get away with, guys? So they used to have it at 18 frames per second, but that gives you that stuttery stop motion black and white film look, right? So after a lot of experimentation, 24 frames per second was the smoothest we can get motion for the least amount of film footage, right? So that's how we ended up there, right? So 24 frames per second, all good. Now the other thing that we want to set inside here as well is and I'm going to right click on the timeline. We want to take a look at our playback speed. Now this is what's probably messing some of you guys up, right? So you have to be very, very careful when you set your playback speed, right? You've got three different options. You've got play every frame free versus real time. So that's the essential difference that I need to kind of relate to you guys. Real time is being played back at 24 frames per second. Play every frame means play it as fast as your graphics adapter can handle it. And it's default set to that. So if you are animating to play every frame, you are not animating to real time. And you're being falsely shown how fast things are going. Right? Every frame looks jarred. Okay, I'll take a look at that in a sec. you want to play back real time or play every frame to the maximum of real time. Like don't go faster than 24 frames per second, right? But I usually just set it to real time. Yeah, you're doing it correctly. Play every frame to the max real time. We'll try to play every frame, but you'll get frame drops, right? So you might see like 2 frames, whatever. If your graphics adapter is having trouble handling, you'll get the same thing with real time as well. Yeah, I just prefer setting it to real time, right? So make sure you got those things set up. Okay, so let's get to the business, the next step of layout. That next step of layout is bringing in a camera, right? So in my shots folder, I've got a grayed out camera. I believe, oh yeah, that's, how did that get referenced in? It got referenced in. Not good. Okay, so I'll create a new camera. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to create camera. And we have a few different camera types, right? Camera and aim and camera and aim and up, right? So I'll show you the difference between them real quick. I'm going to bring this guy up. And then I'm going to create a camera and an aim. Bring this guy up. And then create a camera, aim, and an up axis, right? So let's take a look at these cameras, right? So the camera, this is the one I use the most often. It's a bread and butter camera, right? So the ball rig you sent last animation lecture wasn't zeroed out. Oh, okay, cool. All right. So hopefully the rig didn't crack when you zeroed it out. All right. So that's a bog standard bread and butter camera, right? So the camera and aim usually comes bundled in a camera group. So same thing, bog standard camera, except you have an aim controller, right? So the camera will go wherever the aim controller goes, right? So you can take this guy. Remember I talked about constraints, position constraints and things like that? Well, I can come over here. I can take this look at point and I'm going to hold down C and middle mouse button on the curve here. If it'll go. Will it snap to my controller curve? Let's see if we can snap it along here. There we go, right? So let's say I've got the camera snapped to there, right? I can select that aim point, shift select the controller, and then go up to my rigging menu. And in the rigging menu, I have my constraints. So I can say constrained, parent constrained it, right? So this means I can take my main controller from my guy. Oops. Opposite order. So I want to grab the controller, then the look at point. And then parent constrain these two together, right? That means I can grab this guy, move him around, and check it out. The camera will always follow, right? So I can pop into my panels, right? Let's take a look at what the camera sees, right? So if I go into the panels and I go into perspective and it's camera 2, yeah, camera 2, right? So there's my camera 2. Now I'm going to tear this panel off so we can take a look at it separately, right? To do that, I'm going to go back into my panels and check it out. I can tear this off. So it becomes like a separate window, right? So I'm going to return my main window back to the perspective, right? So now we are looking through this camera over here. With my character selected, I can jump up and down and the camera follows, right? So that's what the aim constraint, that's what the camera with the aim does. Does viewing an animation from a distance with the camera cause motion blur? No, we have to turn it on, right? Motion blur always comes turned off because it's an expensive calculation, slows everything down. But we'll talk about that. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to remove that constraint. And I'm going to turn that off. It's the same thing with the constraint here, except there's also an additional control that specifies what direction is up on the camera, right? This idea of an up vector is something that will come into play a little bit later on when we start doing advanced rigging. But it ensures that no matter what happens here, that camera will always maintain or try to maintain that vertical based on the up vector, right? But really, you just spend 90% of your time with just a bog standard camera, right? So I'm going to grab both these camera groups and just delete them. And I'm going to middle mouse button drag this into my shots folder, right? And I'm going to name this cam shot 1, right? So let's get this kind of positioned. So we can position this a couple of ways, right? So I can drag this guy over, right? Or my preferred way is to go into my panels, perspective, and look through my camera, right? So here, now I'm looking through my camera. Now, a couple of things that I'd like to set so I know that I'm looking through my camera. Like this looks just like my perspective view. There's no way I could tell unless I look down here, right? So what I generally tend to do is I'll turn on safe title, safe action, and I will set this to my resolution gate, right? So now, because I've got this, what's called a resolution gate, in other words, it shows me the full resolution and it grays out anything that's beyond that. And I've got the safe title and safe frame. I know I'm piloting my camera, my shot camera, which is exactly what I want to do, right? So let's say I want to get this positioned on my tail character straight away. Well, I'll click on something that belongs to the tail character, ball guy, I don't know, the root controller, and I'll hit F. So when I hit F, I frame up on the guy, meaning that I can kind of rotate around and it'll look at ball guy as the center pivot, right? When you're rendering the animation, you have to do it with the camera, yes. Okay, so hold that thought for a sec, guys. I'll be back in 2 seconds. Just gotta duck out for a quick comfort break. I'll be back. Okie doke, guys, I'm back. I'm probably going to have to duck out for a couple of minutes in just a second here. There's something I got to attend to. Life has intruded, but I'll finish off what we're talking about here real quick. Okay, so when we're rendering the animation, do we have to do it with the camera? Yes. Now, remember I said that inside the outliner, these gray cameras, perspective, top, front, side, never, ever animate with those cameras in mind. Because those cameras are being used for oh, hello. It's not going to. But they're being used for the top view, the front view, right view, perspective view, right? So you never want to use the grayed out cameras. So let's pop back in to our shots folder and we'll take a look at this camera, right? So the few things I want to talk about. Remember when I said in the beginning that people generally tend to look at cameras, materials, shaders, lights as 3 separate objects. And the difficulty of working in any kind of 3D application is to kind of get used to the concept that they're all actually intertwined with the renderer, right? So I'll show you the first example of this and why, even though it's a difficult concept to wrap your head around, you have to think of every rendering sort of system as a collection of cameras, lights, materials, and the renderer, right? So if I pop back out to my camera view, right? I got this 960 by 540, but well, you know, I don't want to shoot it at that. That's not the camera framing I want. So let's take a look at the attribute editor here, right? So we got a few different things we can set in terms of the camera. I'm actually going to fold up a lot of these because they're quite advanced, and then we'll talk about them later on. The very, very basic attributes of the camera for you guys to get familiar with are loosely related to photography. If any of you guys have taken photography or an AV class where you've studied the camera, right? So we've got field of view, right? Which allows you to kind of adjust, the angle of view, right? So allows you to adjust that angle of view. Then we got focal length, right? So I can punch in 35 millimeter lens or 50 millimeter lens, that kind of thing. We've got camera scale, and we've got near clip plane and far clip plane, which you don't have to worry about at the moment. Oh, I keep cutting out on audio. Okay, so I've got no frame drops, and let's do a real quick speed test here. Okay, I'm going to do a speed test. Okay, so basically what I was saying about the cameras, you don't really have to worry about anything here. Let's talk about the first issue. That is our resolution, right? So how do we set that? Well, it's not in the camera controls. The resolution of the final image that we render out is being controlled by the renderer, right? Because this is the final image resolution that's going to be cooked out. Yes, it's in the render. So we're going to go over to our render settings. Not that one. What is up? I keep clicking on the wrong, there we go. Render settings. So here are our render globals, right? Oh, weird. Okay, so my ping test is working okay. I'm just going to soldier through and trust that my stream is actually capturing it at a good frame rate, so you guys can go back and check it out. Is there any way we can get our hands on the project file? You keep cutting out on the audio. Oh, the project file? I thought I sent over the characters, because the project file of laying it out and bringing everything into the My Project, that's up to you guys, right? So I've just sent you the characters. The assembly is now where you guys jump in, put it together, right? Okay, so here I am in the render settings, right? Now, I'm not going to talk about the other tabs in the render settings. We're just going to look at the common render tab. This one here. It's called common because this setting won't change no matter which renderer that you choose. And we have a bunch of renderers we can choose from in here, and it default chooses the Arnold renderer. But down here, we're going to scroll down. We have to set up our file name prefix and image format. I might as well do that now, right? So I'm not going to set a prefix just yet. But let's say we're going to render out as TIFF, right? So a little chat about the file formats. Industry standard, you generally work with TIFFs or EXR files, right? JPEGs and PNG, you don't want to work with those in a professional context unless you're working with proxy footage and you need the speed and etc. But why do you guys think we never work with JPEGs and PNGs? I'm going to set it for TIFFs. Right. So JPEGs and PNGs are image file formats for the internet, for the web. And they're incredibly compressed, right? Hopefully the Twitch stream is working. JPEG also doesn't support alpha channels, yes, right? But the what do they call it? The color bit depth is not very good with the JPEG, right? So bottom line, the TIFF and the EXR contain more color data, more image data, right? So they're better, but they're also bigger. File sizes are bigger, right? Okay, so we're going to set that, but we're more concerned with, we're going to go down and take a look at the frame range we haven't set yet for our project. And we're going to take a look at the renderable camera. So we're going to render out of our camera shot 1, right? Now here's where we choose our image size, and this will directly affect up here. So we want to go HD 1920. HD 1080. I just paused there because I thought, well, we should go 4K, shouldn't we? But no, we'll stick it at HD 1080, right? And you'll see 1920 by 1080, but also the resolution has altered here as well, right? So now we're at the correct resolution, right? So our camera is set properly, right? So now I'm going to position the camera sort of the way I want, right? I might, yeah, I'm just going to come in and super quick create a polygon primitive sphere. And I'm going to middle mouse button. A little trick, I created the sphere. I knew it was selected because when Maya creates objects, it creates them, then selects them for you. And I just did a middle mouse button V snap, so it snapped to the vertex of my tail guy, just so I could see it, just so it would bring it into the viewport for me, right? So now I got it in there, I will place it, right? Now I could have done this in the set file, but I just decided to do it here for today. And I'm just gonna move this guy and pop it up here. And it's going to edit, delete by type history, and modify freeze transformations. What the hell am I doing? I'm coming in here. I'm going to assign a new material, and it's going to be we'll just do a blend for now. I'm going to come to the blend material. I am creating just a real quick sun, and in here is my m_material sun, right? I'm just going to make it a little bit transparent and then raise the incandescence of it a little bit. Let's just leave that incandescence the way it is. Something like that, right? I'm not working with colors, just black and white, just for now. And now I'm going to sort of position my camera, right? I'm going to come over here. I'm going to go into where I've created this. And I'm going to put that inside my props folder, inside my set folder, rather. So there we go. We've got our sun and we've got our city street. Right. And then this is what the one thing that I love about working in CG is this. You have the ability to just kind of play with elements, right? Doesn't have to be sort of physically accurate. You get the idea, right? Okay, so this will be my first kind of camera placement, right? So with this in mind, I'm going to select my camera, right? By going to View and Select Camera. This will select the camera that you are looking through, right? This is cool. I can tell I'm in the right camera because I've got my field guide set up, but I've also got cam shot 1. And I'm just going to hit the S key because I want to save that position for that camera, right? And so if I were to move the camera like I did just there, oh, I've got auto key turned on. Well, if you accidentally move the camera, the left and right square brackets will cycle you through your camera positions, right? Back and forth, right? So you can always back up to a previous camera. Can you create ambient occlusion with the sun? Yeah, that's another lesson. Way later. I generally tend to build my ambient occlusion using a material shader, right? It's just cheaper because it just samples the surface and then creates your ambient occlusion and looks just as good. We'll deal with ambient occlusion later. All right, so we're going to come into our outliner, and I'm going to take my prop and I'm going to set that first, right? And so I'm going into my controls for the ball, right? And now's a good time to tear off this panel because I want to rotate around perspective so I can work with my characters, but I don't want to upset my camera, right? So I'm going to come over here to panels, perspective, or panels, and then tear off a copy, right? And it pops up here. Nice little window. So you can see your shot as you're designing it, right? You can smell fresh fish. What the heck? All right. So this gives me the freedom to pop back over to perspective and switch to perspective. Or I can hit the space bar and click on the Maya in the center and drag my wire up to perspective. There we go. So I can rotate around and I can grab this guy, right? I'm going to bring this guy up. Now I'm going to come back into my camera shot. I'm going to view, select my camera, and I'm going to set this a little bit to more of what I want. So the camera is jiggling all over the place. It's hard to fine tune it. So I might select my controller, hit F to frame on that, and then I'll find that I've got better control over it, right? So that's pretty much the shot I want. So I'm going to view and I'm going to select the camera. I'm going to hit the S key, right? So it's saving a keyframe on that camera there, right? So I'm going to take this opportunity and save, right? And open up the option box. My option box shows that my save has incremental save turned on. That's cool. I just wanted to double check that. So I'm going to save that off, right? So this comes to sort of the first point of what I'm doing. So my little sequence is going to open up with a shot of the sky and then boing, boing, boing. We see this ball, right? So let's get that set up first, right? So with that in mind, I'm going to go back to my ball prop. I can select it here, right? Or actually, let's see if we can set this up so you guys can see both monitors, right? Myself as well. Okay, so I'm going to pop my outliner here. That's cool. Bring this down. Right? So what I want is I've positioned the ball where I want it for the shot, but that's not going to happen there, right? The shot's going to open on the sky with the sun, and then the ball is going to go boing into shot, right? So I'm going to say that we'll probably have maybe frame 20. We'll have that ball at that height, right? So with that ball located there, I'm going to hit the S key, save a keyframe there, right? Now, how the ball enters frame, I'll probably have it do it in 10 frames. So I've set up my Maya with auto key. So what auto key means is all I have to do is move to the frame I want, move the position of the controller, and boom, Maya will throw in a keyframe, right? Now, let's talk a little bit about how I've got my graph curves set up, right? So let's take a look at what I've done here, right? So to do that, I'm going to come over to my Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. Let's take a look at what our animation graph is doing. Now remember, I've only saved keys on the X controller, right? Sorry, on the main controller of the ball. Now, I've got values in the translate X, Y, and Z and the values in the rotate X, Y, and Z, but really it's just moving up and down. That's it, right? So if I come in here And okay, so it's Control Shift, was it? Ooh, I'm always forgetting this non-uniform. There it is. So the only keys that I've put on that affect any kind of change are in the y-axis, right? So let's talk about this. We've got translate X, straight line. It's not doing anything. Translate Z, straight line, same thing. Same with all these. X, Z, rotate X, Y, and Z. They should all be straight lines because they're not doing anything. This is wasted data, wasted calculations, right? So part of the job as an animator is to go back and clean up what are called flat keys. There are buttons and tools that will do that automatically for you. But I'll just go in here, select those keys, and just delete them. You can see those channels vanish. Also in the channel box, let's go back to the channel box. You can see that it only highlights the Translate X, and we've also got a keyframe on the squash. I'm going to leave that because I'm going to involve the squash in what I animate later anyway. Right? So let's talk about what this is doing, right? It's doing what are called stepped keys. Is it possible to pan the camera down with camera track following a spline? Yes, right? Now, I generally don't do spline-based camera movements unless it's for something incredibly specific. And it's not, I'm not saying that nobody's ever done a camera tracking along a spline. Plenty of people do it. But it looks incredibly CG. So let me ask you this question, and this is really incredibly important because a lot of you might be like, well, Al doesn't know what he's talking about. People animate cameras on a spline all the time, right? Yeah, an environmental cinematic, you can put a camera on a spline. So let me ask you this one question. When you animate a camera, what are you animating? This would be an interesting, I wonder if any of you guys will have an answer for this. When you animate a camera, what are you animating? You're animating the spline? No, you are not. The view? No, you are not. Now think, the process of animating is to move an object and give an object life, right? Yes! Thank you, Joe! You are animating the camera operator, right? You are animating the camera operator. Whether it's a Luma crane, whether it's a gimbal, you are animating the operator. So what does that mean, right? What does that mean? So if we had a camera move that went from here to there, it would look incredibly robotic, wouldn't it? Right? But if you animated a camera move like this, with a slight jig to the left, move over to the right, and then overshoot and settle back, you're animating the camera operator, not the camera. That is an important consideration, and it will add to the believability and the realism of your camera work, if you remember that. If you put a camera on a spline, no camera on the planet does that. No camera on the planet. And therefore, it will look CG to your audience. Do you get that? And this is why in a visual effects facility, you generally build very, very complex rigs. One of my first handheld shot camera rigs was actually a cube with some constraints and spring constraints driving the camera. So you'd move the cube and the spring constraints would do this kind of thing. All in an effort for me to try and get that sort of micro adjustments of the camera operator during a handheld camera shot, right? So anyway, it's really important that you guys get that concept, right? Okay, so how would you animate the camera with such good angles? Well, there's a couple of different ways. I'll just as an aside, you guys might find this interesting. One of the things that I did at EA, which I really loved, we got the software Buju, which is a camera tracker. And one day I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. Maya just accepts animation transform data. Why don't I collect my favorite camera moves from other movies? Just motion track it and then stick that data on my camera. So I started playing around with some really, really cool camera moves that I lifted from Hollywood movies. That was fun. That was really super fun. But then, you know, as with all artists, you get bored after a while and you're just like, you know what, I want to create the rig that allows me to hand animate the camera myself. You'll find a lot of advanced tools, studio tools, are like physics-driven Luma cranes, physics-driven, you name it, whatever sort of gimbals that they use in sort of like sampling. Yes, yeah, absolutely, right? But yeah, you'll see a lot of complex physics-based rigs. They're starting to actually appear inside of Unreal, right? So when you open up the level sequencer, I believe they've already got a physics-based dolly and dolly track, and there's one other. I think there's a crane, right? There's a Luma crane in there as well, right? So a lot of VFX houses and development houses for 3D software are recognizing that they need to create real cameras, not CG cameras. Okay, so what I have here, I've set my curves to stepped. So a lot of you guys who are animating are probably, used to this, right? So you set your keys and you're like, woo, right? I don't work that way. No animator really works that way, especially if they're classically trained, right? So what I do here when I'm mapping out the ball bounces is I am doing it using stepped. So I can see what my major keyframes are doing and I'm not distracted by motion because I'm designing timing and composition first and foremost, right? And this is a technique that goes all the way back to early Disney days, right? And a lot of CG animators work this way, right? I've always preferred working this way. I mean, I come from old school where I'm used to flipping my light table and watching the drawings change, right? So for me, it's very, very kind of conducive to the way I work. Now, the one thing about the keyframes is that I can flip from key to key by using the left and right angle bracket. Love working this way, right? So I can go, I set a key on the top. Okay, so I set a key on the top with a ball in the air and I don't want that, right? So let's fix that, right? So I can fix it by going in the graph editor and deleting those keys, right? So we've cleaned up our graph editor. I can come in here, I can delete this key. I can just select it and delete it. But I'll show you how we do it in the timeline, right? So I'm gonna come over to the timeline, right? And I'm gonna select this key, right click, and then delete it. Now this is important. With keyframes, you must right click and delete. If I were to just hit the delete key, boom, right now, it's gonna delete my rig. If I come over here and go edit, delete, it's gonna delete my rig. You have to go to the timeline, right click, and delete here, and it'll only delete your keyframes. In fact, I think they should rename this so that to avoid confusion, they should write delete key, right? But just try and bear that in mind. You cannot delete keyframes any other way than this method. Right click on the key and delete, and it's gone, right? Now, it'll pop back down to the last key it remembers, which is fine. But let's say you want to put this keyframe at the beginning as well. So how do we do it, right? Well, actually, let's back that up, right? So let's say we want to take this keyframe or the pose from there and move it there. Now I can select it by holding down shift and left click and drag it, and I can move this key back and forth, right? And I can shift it all the way over there. But then I've lost that key at frame 10, right? What I can do is I can come over here, and at that position, I'll middle mouse button drag to here. Now what the middle mouse button drag does is it says, I am going to keep your pose there while you find the spot on the timeline you want. So notice I went to the beginning and it didn't just pop back up to the top position because I took the pose here from frame 10, middle mouse button dragged it to frame 1. Basically saying, Maya, don't change this. I'm just moving to a different location. And then I'm gonna hit the S key. And when I hit the S key, my new positional keyframe has overwritten the old one, right? So there, boom, I've locked it in place. The middle mouse button dragging is massively valuable, right? So let's say I wanted to take this top keyframe and move it back. I would middle mouse button. See, it doesn't drop back down. I'll show you. If I were to just left click and drag, right? Boom, it jumps back down. That's no good. But if I middle mouse button and drag, it stays in place while I find the spot I want on the timeline, right? So there we go. Now I can flip back and forth using the left and right angle brackets, and I can figure out my timing. So we have like 10 frames of nothing, and then boom, it's in the air, right? So it's going to come up fast. I don't know if the timing's right. It'll hover, right? So we need a little bit of that hover time. So I'm going to probably head on down to frame 26. Now, a little tip. I generally try to do my major keys on even frame numbers, right? There's a reason for that. It's just, it's easy to keep track of, right? And you know, in terms of, especially when you got hundreds of keys, if you know that all of your keys you've deliberately put on even numbers, it becomes really easy to find, right? A lot of my colleagues say, "Al, you should do it on odd numbers," right? And they're right, because you start with frame 1, you know, and it should be every odd number after that. This is just habit from 2D animation school. So one day I'll change it, but I think it's sort of ingrained. So I'm going to go over to this frame, and I won't do much. I might just drop it a little, right? And that'll knock in another keyframe, right? So I'm going to hit the left and right angle brackets to see what I got for my poses. I'm going back and forth just to check to see if I like it. And then it'll drop slowly, right? So I want it to come up quicker and drop slowly, right? So in that case, it came up in 10 frames. So I'll drop it in another 10. Let's take it right to frame 40, right? And then we'll drop it back down, right? I'll hit the S key. So at this point, I can do a couple of things. I'm just checking in my shot camera, right? See if I like it. Let's put in another bounce. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, so 3 bounces before we focus in our character. Now, I can cycle this, right? I can take what I want here and cycle. But I would rather, well, actually, I'll take this opportunity to kind of show you something else. I would rather hand key this because I want just the change in timing. I want it to sort of pick up. So now, what dictates the timing for me? Well, now I'm in character. I'm thinking, okay, I'm a little tail guy, and I'm doing keepy uppies, right? So how is the first one? Like the first one's solid, right? The first keepy uppie, you bounce it, you might roll it onto your top of your foot, kick it up, or you might just drop it onto your knee and boom, right? And then the second one's a little bit bump, and then maybe the third one goes a little bit haywire. So I want to build that in, right? So now I am in character. I am not just keyframing a ball in the shot. I'm thinking about what the character is doing. This is really important, right? I was animating a lot from the Translate editor to get an accurate timing on each keyframe. I think that's why my animation looks fast, because I'm keyframing every frame. No, that's okay. That's definitely a technique. It's a technique that's utilized in other cases. But we'll talk about your animation and why it might look fast, right? And this is part and parcel of this technique. I was actually going to jump ahead to talk about speed and checking speed and things like that, but let me pop in a few more keyframes, right? So just for the sake of being quick about it, so that's just the theory. I would hand key each of those bounces because first of all, it's our introduction to the character. And secondly, we want a little bit of personality in just the ball going up and down. So how do you show the personality of your character when it's not your character on the screen, right? You have to you have to animate cleverly the object that they're affecting, right? Okay, so to give you an example, if the ball went boing, 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 right? The timing of it kind of gives you a sense of panic, like, he's struggling to get the last few kicks in, right? And here again, I would do research. Yes, even for something as small as this, I would do research. So I'd get my son, who's 12, and say, do keepy uppies, and I'd video him. And I'd study exactly how the ball's going up and down and how he reacts to it. Okay, so let's get this guy. So we've got him down on the ground. We want to set him back up again, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually middle mouse button, the top of that, and I can move that position over if I wanted to preserve it, right? And then move it to where I want it. Or I can take, Yeah, let's just do this. I'm going to delete this key, right? So I'm going to shift select these two keys. Now remember, the first one is down on the ground, the second one's up in the air, right? I can right click and copy, right? And then move to, what did I say, frame 40, right? And then I can right click, paste, right? Oh, wrong keys, wrong keys. Oh, let's back this up. I was wondering what was going on. That's the hover, right? So I can come here, shift select these guys, right? Control copy, go to frame 40, control paste. Oh, that's a good example of why you don't do control C, control V down here, right? Yeah, damn. There you go. Okay. So I gotta grab those, right click, copy, go to frame 40, right click, paste. Because the delete key, the copy key, the paste hotkeys, they deal with Maya universally. If you're dealing with just keyframes, you have to right click and get the proper operation from the right click menu. I think that's why I've been doing that with the flower bag's feet and ears with tapping of the toes and bending of the ears to create excitement and curiosity whilst meeting the other character. Yes, absolutely, right? That's where you want to be as an animator, is studying those personalities and things like that, right? Okay, so just scrubbing back and forth. So we got those in there. I forgot to grab the hover key, so let's middle mouse button, drag that. Maybe there's a just, let's just pop in the same timing for the hover. I hit the S key, right? So it's hovering, right? Let me just check one thing. Did I duplicate this? I did. Okay, so let's grab this guy, delete that. Okay. All right, so I got 2 bounces, and we'll go 70, and we'll drop this guy again. I've got auto keys, so it's all good. It auto keys it down, right? So I'm gonna pop back and forth. Right, so it's gone up twice, right? See how CG it looks though, because each bounce is the same, right? But sometimes that's cool because you can get it up there, right? I'm gonna move to, that's the hover key, it goes all the way down, comes back up. Maybe it doesn't come back up as high, right? And then it drifts over this way. So say the first one comes up, second one comes over on the side a little bit. Actually, maybe it comes up this way and drifts over that way. Actually, that's cool. I like that. Maybe that's maybe a bit too far, right? And then maybe the next one drifts over to the right a bit, right? So just adding a little bit of personality to it a little bit. Okay, so now let's test out our timing. We can do this a couple of different ways, right? So I can come in here and I can just hit play. Now I'm going to right click to double check that my playback speed is real time, right? And I might take my timeline and shorten it up to 70 frames. And what will happen is it'll get to frame 70 and it'll cycle around to the beginning. So to do that, I'm going to grab my timeline slider here. Now you can see that the display here shows that my entire sequence right now is from frame 1 to frame 200. And it's showing me frame 1 to 120. So I can change that. I can adjust this here. If you've played with any kind of nonlinear editor, you get the same kind of controls for the frame, for the timeline. I'm going to grab this guy and I'm going to bring this down to frame 70, right? So it's showing me frame 1 to frame 70. So here from 1 to frame 70 in a timeline that's, or in a project, the project time limit of frame 1 to 200, right? And we can always change that as well. Let's say you go, you know what? This particular shot is going to be 500 frames long, right? So you can make those adjustments there. So with just frame 1 to frame 70, when I hit play, it'll play back and it'll loop, right? So now I'm just watching this monitor here. Boink, 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 right? You can see how even the timing is. So I might want to adjust that. So I'll spend a lot of time here just adjusting these things, right? So for example, let's say, yeah, I've just done this and I'm like, okay, I want to alter the timing a bit, right? So here's my drift key and then it goes down. But let's say when it comes back up, I want it to come up a little bit faster and I want to preserve what's on the back end. So I'm going to highlight these and I'm just going to move these guys down, let's say 48 frames. And I'll go back and select my controller. And the hover time, I want to bring that down as well by 2 frames. And then it'll exit sort of the same, right? So I'll play this back. Bonk, bonk. So a little bit. I think I want to bring it back down a little quicker, right? So I'll just probably take this guy. Oh, actually, let's just take this guy. I can just shift left click just to grab the one. And let's get him to leave frame a little earlier and see how that feels, right? Bonk, bonk, right? So a little bit of faster timing. So the first one goes up nice and easy. Second one's a little bit more panicked. Okay, so let's take a look at a few different things, a few different tools where you can sit back and analyze what you've done, right? So again, I'm going to come into my Windows Animation Editor's graph editor, and we can see our graph curves, right? I've accidentally keyframed on something, so I've given myself some flat curves, but we'll go back and take a look at that in a second, right? So the other tool that we have is our Windows Animation Editor's dope sheet. So the dope sheet is based on a traditional classical animator's way of looking at the timing of your entire scene, right? So I can actually, what I did in the timeline here is fine. I can move the keys back and forth, but that's only moving the keyframes for the controller that I have selected. Let's say I want to take everything in my scene and compress it down. Well, that's what the dope sheet is for, right? So the dope sheet summary, unfortunately, doesn't do it. You have to come over to your view and your scene summary. So the scene summary shows absolutely every keyframe in your entire scene. So you can universally, shift, select these guys, right? And move these guys around by middle mouse button dragging left and right. So I can affect the universal timing changes. So the dope sheet is another area that I go and take a look if I want to make these universal changes, right? Okay, so let's say we're happy with this, but we want to see much more accurate timing, right? So I'm going to go back into my graph editor, right? So Windows Animation Editor's graph editor. Now remember, I've only animated that one universal control, right? So I'm going to say, look, all those channels, right? I want to select all those keys. And now I want to see what it looks like splined, right? So let's play this back and see what we got, right? So I'm going to go back to frame 1 and hit play. Bonk, bonk. It seems quite fast, eh? Right? We have a few things going on here that we need to adjust. That's not too bad. Boink, boink. Okay, so notice how my compositional framing got screwed up, right? That was supposed to be the top of the arc on that ball, right? Looks like it needs more keyframes in the bounce. Yes, absolutely it does. Now's not the time to do it, right? And I'll show you. Okay, so let's take a look at what happened in the graph editor, right? Here it is, right? It's taken this keyframe, right? And that's supposed to be the top of my arc. If we take a look at the translate Y, that's supposed to be the top of the height of Y. And it's gone over to meet the next keyframe, right? So this is what Maya does with animation curves. It interpolates or it guesses those spline curves. And so this will be like the huge headache for you guys animating, because once you allow Maya to interpolate the curves, unexpected results happen. This is one of those times where an unexpected result has happened, right? So oftentimes we'll have to come in here and we'll need to adjust that tangent, right? And then adjust the other tangent handle. I'm just left-clicking the key, left-clicking the tangent handle, and middle mouse button dragging just to flatten that curve. And when you scrub back and forth, it's still screwed up my composition, right? So I'm going to have to make adjustments there, right? In terms of what the curves are doing, right? That's not too bad. I can just grab these guys. I can middle mouse button drag them down, right? And so notice how that's affected my composition as well, right? So I can come in here and I can adjust those to taste, right? And I might grab these guys, bring them down a bit, right? So you can make adjustments in the graph editor this way. Now, this brings up an important point in that from the get-go, I want to build an awareness in you guys of what the curves are doing on what axis. This is the most painful part of 3D animating, is the graph editor. All animators across the planet are universally agreed that the spaghetti strand mess that you find in the graph editor is infuriating, right? So I'm trying to get you guys used to it one curve at a time. Because when you get a fully rigged character, you're going to be looking at literally a spaghetti strand mess of curves, and you won't know how to make head nor tail of it. Now, here's how you make head or tail of it, right? If I come in here, I'm going to reset this back, right? Because we can do curve cleanup later. I use a technique called lining up my keys. I had to adjust so many keyframes in Graph Editor. It took me a good hour. Yes, I'm here to save you that pain, right? So you spend as much time as you can in this mode, right? Not only are the keys easier to identify, but I do what's called lining up my keys. So I'll talk about what that means in a sec. Well, I can show you, right? So when I find my keyframes, I'll generally select all my characters' controllers and set a key, right? So let's, yeah, I'll probably get there in a second. But what that means is for every keyframe, if I take a look at all the channels, all my keyframes line up. See that? All my keyframes line up. I got a couple of errant ones here, but that's okay, right? When I key, I try to make sure all my keys are in a line, right? If you keyframe randomly all over the place, you are making your life hell. Absolute hell. They look like good friends. I think I'll change ID and connect them. Yeah, why not? Yeah, for sure. I had like 60 keyframes to adjust. Yeah. Now, if you line up your keys, right, it becomes easy to find. It becomes easy to make sort of universal changes to timing, right? Now, it's not always going to be like this, because as we start layering it in, I'm going to start adding to my keyframes breakdown keys, which is the more keyframes you set. You need more keyframes. So there are 3 stages of keyframing, right? There are your keyframes, actually 4 stages. There are your story keys, which I'm doing right now. Just enough poses in the composition to tell the story. It's kind of like storyboards, right? Yeah, timing's the hardest thing. If you keep to this, right? So my story keys are like, ball is in the shot, ball's not in the shot, right? Ball's in the shot, ball's not in the shot. That's enough. You don't need any more than that, right? Automatic keyframing is what screwed me up because I had to realign them. Yes, I love animating with auto key, but it takes a bit of getting used to, right? Some of you may prefer to just set your point in the timeline, pose your character, hit the S key. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I just prefer auto key turned on because I like to move to a spot in the time frame, pose my character, move to another time, pose my character, right? It's just, it works better for me so I can nail down keyframes really quick, right? But you have to remember, every time you move the character, it's setting a keyframe, right? Yeah, that's okay. That's fine. It's not like one technique is better than another. I still know animators that animate that way. They won't hit the S key. They'll hit Shift W for translates, Shift E for rotates, Shift R for scale, right? So that they really control where the keyframes are going. Okay, so I will show you how. I'm leery about showing you character sets, but I think I might do that at this point. And the reason why I'm leery of showing you character sets is because it's rapidly becoming deprecated, i.e. not a lot of people use character sets these days. They generally tend to make their own. Actually, you know what? I'll show you how to make your own. It's probably better that way, right? And I'll explain to you guys what character sets are. Yeah, let's do it that way, right? The reason why people don't use character sets is there's a calculation bug in the background that prevents it from being used with animation layers or the time editor or the animation time editor, right? So I'll just show you anyway because the theory of it is excellent. So I'm going to move on. You know what? Let's just get 2 bounces in and we'll reveal the character, right? So this will be a slow camera pull out and a tilt down, and then we'll see our tail guy having fun doing keepy uppies, right? Character set. So to get my character set up, I'm going to create character sets, right? Because if I want to animate him, right, I got to select keyframes. I got to like hit the S key, but then it's going to key all my channels and it's just a huge headache, right? So what I'm going to do is, well, first of all, let's go back to this guy here, just so I can figure out what's happening. And it comes back down, goes back up, comes back down. And even though the camera is not there yet, actually, yeah, let's do that. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to expand this out to 100 frames, right? So let's get there. Now I'm going to select my camera, and I want to start moving the camera out and slightly down. But if I set the keyframe now, actually I'll do it and I'll show you, right? So let's say, okay, I like that camera shot. We've got the ball going up and down. Now, let's say I'm like, okay, you know what? I want the camera to pull out and tilt down and reveal my character, right? Cool. It's auto-keyed, it's set. But watch what happens when I scrub the timeline. Oh, I've got it set to linear. That's actually good. It saved me, right? You guys will have yours set default to tangent or curves, right? So here is what will happen. Let's come in here, grab these guys. Oh, right, okay. I'm gonna set that to tangent. Right? So, see what happened? I set the keyframe for what I wanted at frame 60. But it's like, oh, no, wait a minute. I didn't want the camera to pull back out from there all the way back. I wanted to stay on the sun for a while. This is another thing that you guys will run into. You will forget to put in a keyframe to lock the position of the camera, right? The set is going off camera. Yeah, no, I'm not too worried about that. So what I want to do is I want to lock this down. And to do that, I'm going to take this keyframe. I'm going to middle mouse button drag it to, I don't know, frame 50, right? And I'm going to set a key there on my camera, right? View, select. Did I set a key? Yeah, I did. Okay, there we go. So it stays there. And then it starts to move down. It's set on linear. This is probably what you guys will see, right? So let me come there, grab these guys. This is likely what you guys will see, right? So the camera stays there and then starts to come down. Oh, I set something accidentally on there. That's okay. I'll fix it in a sec. I was doing a push in. Don't push in. Come in here and let's set the S key on that one, please. Oh, yeah, okay. So here's another situation, right, where we come in here and we take a look. Man, camera's doing something really weird, right? So let's come into our translates. I'm going to hit the F key. So check this out, right? Camera's going in and going out, right? On the translate X. And that's totally screwed up my camera shot, right? Well, here's what's happening. Again, Maya is interpolating our curves for us, which is a pain. It's going up and it's going down, right? So I'm going to just grab these two keys because that's what's pushing the camera forward and then back again, right? I'm going to say, look, I don't want you to do that. Just stay flat, right? So you can see that I click this flat line. Now I've been using this one over here, this spline tangents, and then this one over here, flat tangents. And the one I said I was animating in is step tangents, right? So those are the three. The spline, again, is just the curve, the silky smooth curves, right? Star Trek Next Gen intro with the Enterprise. Who knows? Possibly, right? Now I've told Maya to flatten from this key to that key, right? So there we go. There's my ball, comes up. And then we slowly pull out, right? Now we got a few kind of issues again. You can see there's more camera movement, right? So that again exists on the other keys, right? So I'm going to grab these two and say, look, don't move up and down. Just stay flat going from one key to the next. Then start to move away, right? And we got no rotation. We don't want any rotations. We don't want any scales. So I'll grab those guys because they're doing weird things to the camera too, right? So let's grab all those guys and say, look, delete, right? I just want you to pull the camera back. Hold that camera there and then pull it back. I'm glad that this happened because it gives me an opportunity to kind of talk to you about this stuff, right? Now, is the camera pullback going too fast or too slow? I don't know. Let's play it back, right? So I'm going to sit here. I'm going to play. Bonk, bonk. Way too fast, right? That's not what I want, right? So how do we adjust it? I'm going to come in here. I'm going to grab those keys. And I think to myself, 10 frames is a little less than half a second. That's kind of not what I want, right? So this is where you actually start to have to think like an animator, right? If you understand that 24 frames a second is what you're dealing with, you'll know that 10, 12 frames is half a second. Camera pulling back in half a second is naturally going to be fast, right? So I'm going to grab these guys and say, no, you know what? 1,000, 2, 1,000. So it's probably going to have to be like 2-second pullback, right? So I'm going to come in here and roughly go to frame 90-ish, right? And I'll hold down Shift. And if I hold down Shift, it'll just constrain it to the horizontal axis, right? And then the camera pulls out, right? So I'm going to play this back at speed. Just check it out. Ball, 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 right? So that's cool. I'm kind of happy with it. I think that it's still possibly going a little too quick, but that's okay, right? Now, there are a couple of other issues as well, but I wanted to work out timing. Now I can adjust my framing a little bit. Now I know that I'm on frame 90. I've got auto key turned on. I'm just going to adjust my camera positioning a little bit, right? And I didn't want to go that far out anyway, right? So something like that. And I'm just going to check to see what that's like. That's a little bit more of what I was after anyway. Right? And then, so now I'm going to find a pose for this character. The flour sack, I put it in the chat. Right, I'll put the character files in the chat in just 1 second. Okay, so this was I wasn't expecting the camera to go that wonky, but it was a really good opportunity for me to describe to you what happens inside the graph editor with the curves, why I set things to step tangent, and how to clean things up if your movement goes crazy. You will have a lot of issues like this, especially with camera, where you set the camera and it starts to go, and then it'll like yo-yo back and forth and do all kinds of stuff. That's exactly what's going on. It's inside the graph editor. When Maya automatically figures out what those curves are doing, it'll just make stuff up. Well, it's not going to make stuff up. It uses a mathematical algorithm that you might not have predicted, right? So you want tighter control over your F curves, right? Now, one of the, actually, I'll talk about the intermediary step. So one of the things I generally tend to do when I'm working with this kind of animation is that I've talked to you guys about the fact that I enjoy working with step tangents, right? Because it just locks those keys for me and shows me that. But when I start putting in in-betweens, right? I don't go spline straight away. I go linear, right? So linear kind of does the motion that I'm after, but very mathematically, right? But I can get a sense of the timing, right? But I don't get these strange things happening with my curves. Yeah. Right? So oftentimes I'll use, again, linear interpolation because it doesn't give me these overshoot curves or any kind of craziness, right? Okay, so I'll leave that camera move there. Let's talk about prepping this character, right? So we're going to come down. We see the character roundabout there, possibly when he catches the ball. So I'm going to pre-pose him before he appears in camera. And yeah, let's start animating him at frame 70, right? Even though he's off camera a little bit, right? So let me talk a little bit about character sets. First, let's save this guy off, right? And let's take a look at the structure of our character. So let's say we wanted to, so we got our midsection, right? Woo! And we've got this guy. That's cool. All right. So let's say we wanted to keyframe our entire character. So one of the things I might do is I'll select my character control, frame up on it, also go into my outliner, and if I hit F, it'll also frame in the outliner. Otherwise, in other words, it'll take you right to where that controller is and open up the list so you can see where it is. Right? I've done this because I want to grab all the controllers that will need a keyframe, right? Including the FK controls on the tail, right? Oh yeah, I did a lot of them, didn't I? All right. So I've got all the controls selected, right, for my character. So I'm going to come over here to character set. I'm going to not right click, go to the drop down. Set the active animation layer. One quick second. Just trying to figure out why I can't get in there and create a character set. Oh, create set. No, that's the quick select sets. Why can't I get in there and create a character set? Oh, there you go. So I've left clicked. I thought it was a right click. I guess not. So I left click on where the character sets are, and I'm going to grab character set editor, right? So I got this sort of opened up, right? Now what the character set editor does is it just creates selection sets for you. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to add a character set here. Oh, come on. Let's see. Ooh, where are you now? Where are you? Could have sworn you were in... Oh, okay, here. So under the animation menu set, under key, we'll create a character set. There we go. So I'm going to come over here, I'll open up the option box for character sets. And I am going to name this one character set, or ch1 underscore ball guy 1, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, look, I want you to take all of those controllers, put them in a set for me, right? And I want you to include all the keyable channels except scale, visibility, and dynamic, right? Just the translates, just the rotates, right? So I'm going to create the character set there. So down here, I've got ball guy, right? Now, if I select ball guy and I hit the S key at frame 70, it will save keyframes on all of my controllers, right? Except scale and visibility, right? Let's just pop into our graph editor, double check that. Suspiciously, why did it? Did I or did I not just create this with translates? X, Y, Z. It included the rotate. Oh, no. Yeah, want the rotates. Oh, yeah, no. That's it. It's done it, right? So there we go. We've got all our translates and all of our rotates and just keyframes on those. Oh, yeah, that's what it, I've got keyframes to lock the character down in the beginning. So back at the top of this lesson, right, I set keyframes. Yeah, so for those guys, they were keyframed and locked into position at frame 1. That's fine. I've got the character sets now doing it, right? So what this means is that every time I hit the S key, the only things that get keyframes are the things in the character set, right? So obviously we can refine that, right? So if I wanted to, I can say grab this controller and then this controller, and I can come into my key, create character set. Where is it here? Create. Oh, there we go. Create sub character set, right? So when I create the sub character set, I can create a sub C1, and this will be torso, right? All keyable except scales, visibility, and dynamics. So I'm going to create a character subset, right? So now, if I come in here, I've got my ball guy plus ball guy torso. So if I select ball guy torso, right, I move to, say, frame 76, and I've got this set to auto key, and I pause my character out this way, right? I can something like that, right? Then the only thing getting keyframes in here are on the sub character set, right? So just these guys are getting keyframes, right? And only on the translates and rotates. So this way you can really, really control what gets keyframed when you hit the S key or set auto key. So you can refine that. I'm only going to set up the two. You can refine that by going in and left clicking and going to the character set editor. So if I open up the character set editor, here's my character set, and then here's my sub character set. So let's say for the torso, I don't want any translates on the mid, maybe, right? So I can grab these guys, right? Open up this guy. I'll hit the F key to frame up on it. The mid controller, right? The way the connection editor works, it's whatever selected in the left window will be connected to whatever selected in the right window. So if I just deselect, if I select this guy and, oh, come on, why is it not? Oh, sorry guys. It's been a long time since I've used character sets. But if you want to disconnect certain channels, here's where you do it. I just can't remember how to do it. So that's it, the theory of it in a nutshell of how character sets work, right? So if you were doing a bipedal humanoid character, you can go left and right leg, left and right arm, and just key that arm, just key the head, and then you can have the overall key the whole character. So you choose your character and your character subset, and that is what the S key will drive. So here's why I haven't used it in years, right? The animation data in the character sets cannot travel into animation layers and cannot travel into the tracks editor or anywhere else, right? So this is why I don't use it, right? And I struggled with a headache of trying to get it to work until I found out from a technical director buddy of mine that it's just not supported, right? automatically frames the camera as well as the object. Just looking at all of those groups and sets gives me anxiety. I can't imagine what it looks like on a character. Yeah, you guys are now kind of understanding why I'm using a very, very simple character, because there's lots of concepts to cover. But you can be rest assured that I'm teaching you, what I'm teaching you with this setup is applicable to all characters. It's just more controllers, right? Okay, so let's get to what I do instead, right? So what I generally tend to do instead is to grab, let's grab these two controllers, right? I'll grab those two controllers, and instead I'll just come in here and I'll create a set, a quick select set, right? And I'll call that set select and then torso, and I'll just add that to my shelf. I've got an animator shelf I made, and just add that, right? So this allows me to just select that and then hit the S key, right? And then away you go. So most animators prefer just creating selection sets as opposed to coming here and collecting, click and selecting a character set instead. And there's no problems with creating selection sets. You can't control directly where the keyframes go into what channels, but it's a small price to pay to just be able to select things quickly and set a keyframe. Besides, there are other tools to deal with cleaning up the keyframes on various channels, right? So that's character sets. Now, why I walked you guys through it is to let you know that there's more to animating than just selecting a controller and setting keyframes, right? There's a lot involved with setting up a character. So I walked you through rigging this bouncing ball and everything that's kind of involved with that. Setting yourself up as an animator is another thing altogether. So generally when you get a character, you'll either be supplied with a bunch of selection sets or what's called a picker page, right? Or you'll go through and make sets yourself, right? So a picker page is actually a window that opens up with a concept art of your character, and they'll have like little boxes. Actually, I'll just show you. I don't want to introduce you to a picker page just yet, right? And our characters are simple enough, we don't need a picker page. But the one that I use quite often is the Anim School Picker, right? And what the Anim School Picker allows you to do is you can create any character concept art you want, and you set up these buttons, right? When I click on the head button, it selects the head controller, you know, and so on and so forth. I click on IKFK, and it'll switch the IKFK for me, right? So that's basically how animators work, right? 90% of animators across the planet have a picker page of some kind. You'll see some characters, I don't know if you've seen it, where there'll be a NURBS object in the viewport with little NURBS icons that allow you to select the eyes, the face, the nose, etc. Right? So that's another form of picker page as well, right? You can use concept art as a template similar to what you did with a car, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, any image can be the basis of your picker page. I'm not going to get into facial controllers yet because I have a lecture based on blend shapes, blend shapes supplemented by facial controls. So I'll get into that later. There are many, many different ways of rigging a face, right? You can have bone-driven deformations in the face. You can use CV curves to kind of control deformations of the mouth. You can use blend shapes. There's a number of different solutions you can do for facial animation, right? In fact, I don't know if I told you guys, that's generally nowadays it's two separate departments. So you get your animators, your character animators, they're chiefly responsible for the body, and then you'll get facial performance animators. And so what they'll do is they'll rig a camera, an animator-only camera, constrained to the face of the character, right? And so that camera that's constrained to the face of the camera is what the facial performance animators use. If we use Blender, would it be the same setup? Yeah, very similar, right? So David, Ben, and Bibin ran me through their character setup last year. Same thing, picker page. I don't like their picker page. It's really, really dry. But they've got a picker page, control objects, constraints, joints, all of it's the same. Constraints, joints, controllers, picker page, same in 3D Studio Max, same in XSI, same in Houdini, right? So that'll never change. All 3D packages operate this way, right? How many moving parts need to be taken into consideration per frame? Oh, sorry. Facial animation seems very time-consuming and difficult because of how many moving parts need to be taken into consideration per frame. Yes, absolutely. Right? Any of you guys try sculpting a character face? Nope. Failed badly? How long did it take you? How long did it take you to sculpt a face? Before you decided to call it quits? 20 plus hours? Yeah. So 20 plus hours, multiply that by 12. When you're making blend shapes, it's like you're re-sculpting your character over and over and over again. There's no easy way around it either. That's why they have separate. Well, actually, one of our graduates, Ryan Morgan. That's one of his jobs was to do digital doubles and blend shapes just for the face for digital double of Tom Cruise, right? So modeling Tom Cruise 20 times, right? Yeah, I'd love to be just a facial modeler, right? Just doing expressions and blend shapes. That would be a super fun job to do, I think. I'd enjoy it. Some people might consider it a pain in the butt, but not me. Okay, so now I've got that out of the way, right? I'm not going to set up any selection sets because our character's simple enough. I just want to go through and pose him now, right? So if I grab this controller, I know that I set a keyframe on keyframe 1 to lock him into place. And I'm going to start thinking about what I want to do on frame 70, right? Now, before I go into frame 70, you know what? Let's just go for it, right? So I was going to put in a lockdown key at frame 68, but that's all right. Let's get this guy posed up, right? So I'm also double checking on here. So we need to, actually, let's start at frame 60. I'm going to tweak the frame 60 key a little bit. And I'm also going to move this over to frame 70. I'll obviously have to adjust it, right? I'm going to move him a little bit to set a keyframe on that, right? And then I'm going to go back to my character, right? And now I'm going to just find an interesting pose. Now, I was debating with myself whether or not to make this basketball. But I decided to go football. I think it's going to be harder, though. It's easier, in my mind, to animate the poses for dribbling, right? For like basketball dribbling, than would be to try and get the idea that he's using his foot. I don't know. We'll try it, right? Okay, so now we are in IK visibility mode, right? So I don't know if this will work for me. Let's try it. It likely will not, right? But let's see how far we get, right? Because there's no rotation on this. So I want to get this tail out and around. Actually, let's start with this guy over here. Let's get him out and around. So we might run into issues with the IK, but you know the tail is. I think we'll be okay. Let's give it a try, right? So now I'm just trying to think about what pose is that tail going to take when it receives that ball, right? Right, and I'll maybe bring this guy down a little bit. And now I've got to try to mimic a little bit of a head turn. and I want to set this move tool not to world axis, but to object axis. So I know exactly kind of which way this guy is sort of looking, right? And same with the rotate. I'm going to hold down E, left click, and switch from world to object or to gimbal, right? Now I'll talk to you about gimbal in just a second. I just want to pose this guy up, right? So that, you know, that looks kind of okay. I might push this forward just a little bit so I can push this back. And there's a little bit more of that kind of thing going on. A little bit of a bump in the head, that's fine, right? And then maybe move this guy a little bit like that, right? And then let's get this ball in position, right? And then I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second, right? So something like that, right? Modeling, I'm never going to model people now. Oh, don't worry about it. I'm hopefully going to make it enjoyable in terms of modeling people. Modeling anything organic is so much more complex than structures in my limited experience. No, you're absolutely right, Tyrone. That's generally why I teach hard surface modeling first, then organic modeling afterwards, right? Okay, so there's what I've got for the first pose, right? And I've got you guys. I got to figure out how to wrap this up quick, I think. Yeah, I've got you guys till 3. Okay, let me duck out again, grab a quick refill of coffee. I'm going to go about 10 minutes over if that's okay. But there are a few things I'd like to talk about, right? So hang tight. I'll be right back. Okay, look, back guys. It's 3:05. Oh yeah, okay. Just want to end off talking a little bit about gimbal lock and issues with rotation, right? So that's my first pose. Now I'm gonna grab all my controllers here just so I can show you. I'm actually going to make a quick select set with all my controllers. I'm gonna go to create, set, quick select set. And I'm going to name that select all, right? And add that to my shelf. Now, when we come back into the graph editor, and we take a look at our keys for this, you can see that I've got all these controls and all the keys are sort of lined up in the one spot, right? Oops. At frame. Oh yeah, I've only moved the mid, the head, and the tail. And the tail controls. Where are my keyframes? Auto keys set up. Well, that's okay. I'm going to select all my guys, hit the S key so I can put in a reference key. Now, the technique I wanted to show you, again, is that I make sure that all my keys are lined up, right? Now, I've saved keys on absolutely everything for the keyframe because I don't want anything to mess up that pose. I want it to be completely locked down from top to bottom, all my controllers, right? So I generally tend to do that with my story keys. Some of my more experienced animator buddies say, no, you shouldn't do that. But I just like it. It's a nice sort of safety net, right? And then I can go in and with the keyframes in place, I can tweak this up. And I know that auto key is just going to make those changes for me. Maybe I'll go up with the tail instead, right? Etc. So let's talk a little bit about gimbal lock and what is gimbal lock, right? So I'm going to grab the ball. Oh, actually, let's do the head. The head's probably the best thing to do, right? So now notice when I hit the W key, hold down the W key and left click, we can switch from world orientation to object orientation. When you're animating, you likely want to be in object orientation so I can tell which way my guy is facing. I find rotation sometimes cause other parts of a model to deform if they are connected with a spline or attached on a different axis. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the headaches. Okay, so if I go into rotate, right, you might be set to, and I'm holding down E and then left click, you might be set to world rotation. So here's the thing that you guys have to know. When it comes to rotation, Maya is lying to you. Maya is not telling you the truth about rotations. World rotations do not exist in the mathematical framework of how Maya deals with kinetic motion. It is simply there for you, right? Maya's just showing you the world orientation, right? Object orientations is a partial truth. It's a partial truth. It's not the whole truth, right? So when I hold down E and left click switch to object rotation, yes, I can see computers are not supposed to lie to you. So if I switch to object orientation, I at least get an idea of which way my character's facing, right? It is also another lie, right? It helps a little bit, tells you which way a character's facing, but it's not telling you the entire truth. If you hold down E and left click and you switch to gimbal, that is what's actually happening mathematically behind the scenes in Maya. The gimbal is the God's honest truth to rotation. Now, notice something very, very interesting about this rotation, right? The X, Y, and Z are not staying consistent. If I rotate the Y, it's taking the X along with it. This is partially because of the calculations involved in determining rotation in the background, using something called Euler rotations or Euclidean geometry, right? So why am I getting into Euclidean geometry and Euler rotations with you guys? Well, because if I were to rotate, let's say I wanted to tilt his head this way. I can't do it. I don't have an axis. I can't rotate the head going in this direction because I don't have a rotational axis, right? And this has to do with the fact that Euclidean geometry calculates rotations in a specific way, and Maya is telling you no mathematical solve will help you rotate that way. So you might say, oh, screw this, right? Screw what's happening in the, mathematically. There you go. Switch to object rotation. Look at that. I can rotate. No problem. What the hell is Al talking about, right? So you'll rotate this way and you'll set a key, right? Meanwhile, Maya's going, okay, you want me to do that, but I've only got these axes. How am I going to get over there with just these axes? Oh, I know. I'll rotate this way, 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 and then I've got your head tilt for you. What happens when you press play is your character will just moving along and the head will go and you'll be like, what? That's gimbal lock. That's Maya saying you wanted the head to just go like this. I didn't have the axes for it. I got to this position with the axes I had left. So when you hit play, the head goes and then goes into position, right? So gimbal lock is something that tortures every animator on the planet, and every animator on the planet has to keep track of what their rotations are doing. Right? Now, having said that, riggers have gotten so good in their job that they will set up a character such that an animator never runs into that problem. Right? But at the end of the day, this is just ball guy, right? So I didn't go and make the changes necessary to sort of remove that, right? But you just have to be wary of it. It's good to sort of train yourself to be kind of wary of gimbal lock. So there we go. Gimbal lock and the graph editor. Two areas that are the bane of every animator's existence in terms of frustration, right? Now, a really, really good rigger or pipeline guy will remove that from an animator's day-to-day life, right? And they will do so because I need to sit here and think about performance. I need to think about what is the personality of my ball guy? What's his emotional state or her emotional state when kind of approaching this ball? Where are my dynamic curves and flats when I'm making this pose? Is that a good looking ball pose, right? So there are so many creative artistic decisions that are absolutely crucial and important to performance that I cannot be distracted by something as silly as gimbal lock, right? So I'm turning this guy's head to make it look like he's looking at the ball, right? And I'll spend an inordinate amount of time just on key poses, which is as it should be, right? Your key storytelling poses need to work, right? This doesn't look much like a foot, so I might move this out so it looks a little bit more foot-like, right? And now I'm regretting not using FK because I think FK would allow me to rotate this in place. It's going to be hard to make it look like this guy's doing keepy uppy. I think it would have been better and easier with basketball. But there you go. I'm on this path now. Right? So, again, one of the big things for your animation assignments in terms of what I'm assessing, right, is this. If you only submit keyframes and breakdowns, you still have a potential of getting a first. It doesn't have to be smooth, free-flowing animation for you to get a first. Because I, as an experienced animator, knows how important keyframes are, right? If you have stellar story keys and keyframes and breakdowns to describe a little bit of the personality and the movement, then you still have full potential to get a first. It doesn't have to be smooth, perfectly splined, perfectly in between the animation, right? So that's the key thing, because what I want you to be doing is focusing your attention and effort on performance, on character, on story, right? Not on technical execution of animation, right? Because that's not where the art form lives. So that's just, I wanted to at least show you two different poses, but I do the same thing. I move to my next keyframe, line up all my keys, right? And then I just keep going on. And I will show you an example of the fact that my sort of approach to this is not dated, right? And it's still very much kind of apropos, right? So let's go to Frozen Breakdown. I think I showed this to you guys, but it's worth taking a look at again, right? So here we go. A breakdown of the animation process after this advert. Okay. So, have you seen this? I think you guys have seen this. This bit is really, really important. Every animator needs to do it. I reckon you guys who are animating the flour sack and the juice box haven't done this, right? Animators are actors with pencils or actors with mice, right? If you want to animate something properly, you have to get up and act it out. And I talk about this in visual studies with creatures and things like that. You got to understand what that performance is. And you cannot be shy about it. You cannot. I mean, you look at this guy and you might chuckle a bit, right? It's sort of funny. But he's doing his job, right? He's getting into character, right? Just to understand that movement and that motion. That's it. That's all I expect from you guys. You do that, you've nailed the assignment. Right? And again, if you look at that carefully, it's all stepped keys. There's a lot of them there, so it feels like motion, but it's not motion, right? You can see it when she does this bit, right? Watch her arms, right? Pop to pose, pop to pose, pop to pose, right? That's exactly what we're doing now with the ball. Popping to a pose, popping to another pose, right? Yes, acting classes are very good. Very, very good. Something you guys might not know, but on Ed, Edd, and Eddy, we used to have a mime come in. And we learned miming technique, which a bunch of us chuckled at first, but it was really hugely valuable. I remember one insight during an acting class, right? Where we had an acting instructor come in and said, okay, I want you guys to act drunk, right? And so we did the stumbling forward, falling down, looking for the car keys, kind of, just being all blind and stupid, right? And then we stopped. And the acting instructor said, okay, you guys are doing a caricature of a drunk, but you're not acting like a drunk. We're like, what? And he's like, because if you think about it, how does a drunk act? How does a drunk person act? You guys know? No? Sorry? No, that's us observing. That's us observing from the outside the drunk. Floppy and slow, that's us observing the drunk. How does a drunk person act? They act like they're not drunk. Thank you. Thank you. Right? Drunks try to act sober. They desperately try to act sober, right? So then, that changes. Like, we'd be like the drunk going for the keys, going, no, the keys are right there. I'm going to grab those keys. The door is over there. I'm going to get to and it brought that realism to the performance when we realized we're trying to act sober, right? That's the key difference. That's why acting is important, right? Because you find that nuance, that subtle emotional context for the performances that you do, and then you animate it, right? You act it out, and then you animate it, right? But you don't have to have experience with it. You don't have to have experience with acting, right? So the very first acting you will probably do is just to figure out motion and movement, right? Or just even the dynamics of how do I reach out and grab something, right? I'm not expecting Oscar-winning performances. That's not what it's about, right? It's about sort of getting up out of your chair and trying to understand body mechanics and trying to understand what emotional state you want to be in, right? and then you translate that into your character, right? Which is why, I mean, like, this is not an Oscar-winning performance from this guy. It's not, right? But he got up and he acted it out to figure out a few different things. Poses, timing, the slide down the wall, right? And let me just play this through. I'll mute it so we can continue chatting. But I want you to see the difference between the blocking animation and the final, right? Have a look at this. So here's one that's got smooth in-betweens, everything. Everything's spline curved, right? You can see how much was figured out in the blocking phase, right? It was all there. The whole performance, there's nothing different. The whole performance was right there, right? And then of course, after final layout with lighting, rendering, everything, right? Shaders and everything, right? So here's where the cloth is moving and you got the hair moving and the simulation guys have come in and done their thing, right? You can see the ribbons flopping around, right? So that's the process in a nutshell that every animator has followed since they started animating. Well, pretty much since Disney and the Nine Old Men, I think, right? So that's it. Story keys, keyframes, breakdowns, line up your keys, right, inside the graph editor. Create your selection set so you can carefully pick certain things and keyframe just those elements. Something I'm going to also tell you. Now, we've got reference characters, right? So the only thing that exists in our layout scene that's custom to the layout scene, other than the sun that I quickly chucked in the background, is the animation data. Animation data is the only thing that lives in this layout scene, right? We've referenced in the character exists somewhere else, the set exists somewhere else. The only thing that Maya remembers are the keyframes on these control objects, right? Yes, please do. You can send over your videotape yourself acting. Now, one of the things about videoing yourself acting, right? Something to keep in mind. You cannot be somebody acting in front of a camera, right? So to give you an idea, when I was working on Ed and Eddie, we all used to have mirrors on our light table, right? And we'd look at them for facial expressions, and we draw the facial expression. We look at it and go, "Arr," and then draw the facial expression. And then the director would come by and say, "Don't do that," right? All you're drawing is somebody making faces in a mirror. I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, how am I supposed to do it?" And the director said, "If you're angry, just get up and be angry, right? Be angry. And then remember how it felt, where your muscles stretch." And this is really hard. It takes a lot of body self-awareness, right? And he'd be like, "Remember where the stress is. Remember where your balance is. Then draw." I was like, "Oh, shit." But he was right. It was much harder to do, but he was right. Because when I was looking in a mirror, I was making faces, and there was no flavor to it at all. No flavor. I was like mechanically drawing a facial expression. When I got up and abandoned the mirror and started acting it out, I was much more passionate. Yes, flour sack. Okay, so I'll sort that out, and then that'll be it for today, guys. So I was hoping to get a little bit further, but it's enough there to give you a flavor of my approach, right? And there's a lot to think about, right? And I'm actually glad I streamed this so you guys can pick at the basics, because these basics you're going to take with you for the rest of your career, right? So let me go in to where I've got my actors, right? And I'm going to drop these in the Discord, right? There's the flour sack and the juice box. Did they go over? There you go. There's the juice box. There's the flour sack. Actually, you know what? I'll make an asset. Let's make an assets folder. There you go. So I'll pop these in here, right? So that they always stay kind of at the top of the thread. I'll just show you guys. I'm just creating it here under assets, right? And then the ball guy, right? And then there's the prop. And the prop was the basketball. The basketball was just the first bouncing ball rig I walked you guys through, right? But I thought, why not? Let's recycle it, use it here, right? Okay. Yeah, so they're pinned to the channel, but they're under, you guys can see, right? Under the assets, right? So they're all there, right? And let's pin this to the top. Oh, let's pin all these guys. Box. And ball guy. And basketball. Okay, that's cool. Any more questions, guys? Because that's going to be it for me for today. Okay? And we will talk to you guys later. All right. I know it's complicated. I know it's really, really kind of difficult to wrap your heads around. But remember, at the end of the day, it's just a ball with a tail, okay? It's just, if the very worst thing that you do is just get familiar with how to set keyframes and use controls, that's fine, right? That's fine. Just do your best with it. You'll learn a boatload that you'll carry with you through the rest of your careers, okay? Games, guys, there's a slight addition to this process. At the end, you have to bake everything down to your character joints, but I'll talk about that later. That's not hugely important at this stage. Okay, I'll talk to you guys later. Cheers. Okay, so that's it for me. I'm glad I could end off with a little Frozen bit because it really emphasizes how important just locking in your keys are. And using step keys and things like that. An interesting thing, Corey Pelton, the lead animator for the Overwatch cinematics, he said it's sometimes difficult because a lot of the producers that he works with are not used to seeing in stepped frames. So it might not always be the case in a production where you're working on stepped keys, getting keys approved, then getting breakdowns approved, and et cetera, et cetera. That's the ideal situation. Something I'd love to happen. But sometimes you'll be working with an animation director or a producer who wants to see everything moving fluidly. So you just sort of kind of have to adapt to your workflow. But in terms of starting your very first animation project, this is the best way to approach it, right? It reduces the amount of headaches because, trust me, the headaches compound upon each other by several orders of magnitude. So getting your head around this kind of workflow or pipeline, even though it's complicated to set up in the beginning, will actually free you up to animate and be creative as you dive into your sequences later on. So there you go. I think I got one more lesson with this before I leave the students go for it. And then I'm going to shift over into character animation. So hopefully you guys got a lot out of it. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, just drop them into the chat. And if you want anything specific for me to talk about, although there's a plethora of YouTube videos out there, I will give you at least my perspective and my experience on that. So I will talk to you guys later.